Taking the high-speed rail, or the Gaotie, from Taipei to Kaohsiung or Tainan is a modern wonder and a thrilling pleasure. Probably only the Shanghai Maglev or some of the newer Shinkansen trains in Japan can surpass its smoothness and brutal speed. You sit comfortably for an hour, two at the most, and end up in Taichung, Tainan, or Kaohsiung. It really beats flying. You get out of your seat as the train pulls into the station, and you wonder why can't it be this easy in the States? As it turns out, the high-speed rail has had a few tough early years. This included construction delays, financial struggles, and political squabbling that ended up in the government bailout. Exaggerated optimism on the part of both the government and the private rail consortiums led to everyone having egg on their faces. So, we're in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about the Taiwan High Speed Rail. It's going to be a bit of a long one. So let's start with the vision. Like a kid born in order to save its parents' marriage, the high-speed rail was conceived in a fit of optimism. Taiwan Island is 394 kilometers long and 144 kilometers wide. Nearly 70% of its 23 million people live in the urban areas on the island's western plains. The high-speed rail project would connect these urban areas and help people access economic opportunities in Taipei, Banqiao, and more. Government planners and project managers had this vision of people doing regular commutes between Taichung and Taipei, crossing the some 150 miles between the two cities in an hour. People love the vision and the ambition, but it's easy to forget the substantial engineering and political challenges. Informal planning began as early as the 1970s when the Ministry of Transportation and Communications proposed a 345-kilometer rail line that would connect Taipei and Kaohsiung. No one really did anything with it for several decades, though. In 1992, the Taiwan government settled on a potential setup before budget concerns scrapped the whole thing. By now, the administration was feeling the heat from its expensive social programs like the Taipei MRT and the Universal Healthcare Project. As an American, I do want to underline this point. The government in Taiwan actually managed to do universal healthcare. I'm still in awe. But here's why they chickened out. In order for the high-speed rail to achieve its goal of actually connecting these major cities, the rail would have to cross 14 counties, 68 townships, and 32 districts. Along the way, it would have to overcome substantial engineering challenges. For example, in the section of railway that crosses Yunlin County, it would have to somehow cross a big highway, Provincial Expressway number 78, while going some 100 miles an hour. Also in Yunlin County, the ground has for some reason been sinking, subsiding some 55 centimeters in the past 7 years alone. So put that one on the to-do list. Then in the southern section of the railway, builders would have to place a 157-kilometer, or 98-mile, long viaduct between the city of Baguashan, Changhua County, and Duoying in Kaohsiung. It would be the second longest bridge in the world of any kind, and because the viaduct would have to cross fault lines, it would have to be specially engineered to deal with earthquakes. So to sum things up, building the high-speed rail would be expensive. Expensive at a time when doing expensive things is getting harder and harder. The Taiwan government was staggered by the project's sheer cost. In the case of the Taipei MRT, the government paid for the construction costs of the network and then transferred it to the Taipei MRT company to operate. The Taipei MRT company did not shoulder any of the costs of the build. But the first stage of the MRT network cost a mere couple $1 billion. Putting down $15 billion for a railway that would not be open for the better part of a decade would expose the administration to immense political pressure. So the Taiwan government opted for a different financing model than what they did for the Taipei MRT. They turned to public-private partnerships that would help shoulder these immense costs. The model that is settled on is called a Build, Operate, Transfer, or BOT. It's been around for a while. Early turnpikes and canals in the United States operated this way. The government would offer a concession to a private entity to finance, design, construct, own, and operate something for many years, even decades. The private sector gets a valuable piece of infrastructure that spins off cash for decades. The public gets to use that infrastructure without having to pay for the whole thing, if it all goes right. If it doesn't, and often doesn't, and it leads to the equally famous BOL model, Build, Operate, Litigate. So let's talk about the two bidders. Taiwan government put out a tender for the railway project, and two consortiums bid for the job. They are the Tsinghua High Speed Rail Consortium, CHSRC, and the Taiwan High Speed Rail Consortium, THSRC. They proposed differing approaches to building the railway. THSRC's technology was based on the Eurotrain, pictured here.
itself a joint venture with Alstom and Siemens. CHSRC's bid withdrew from the Japanese Shinkansen, technology that had been in operation since 1964. In September 1996, the government announced that THSRC won the bid, receiving a 35-year concession for the rail system and a 50-year concession for the rail stations. A bit later, in May 1998, the Taiwan High Speed Rail Company was established, with banking loans and equity from its 5 shareholders. THSRC won because they made a number of bold promises. They pledged that private money would repay the Taiwan government's entire $3.5 billion upfront investment using secured, long-term loans. Needless to say, this bid was based on questionable assumptions. So let's start with the troubled birth. THSRC's life began on the wrong foot. In September 1999, a 7.6 magnitude earthquake hit Nantou County and Taiwan Island. The 921 earthquake, as it's called, killed 2,415 people and injured 11,305 more. Over 51,000 buildings were destroyed and another 50,000 were damaged. 921 would be the island's most lethal earthquake since 1935. This massive earthquake reminded the Taiwanese that their island is literally a fault zone. The public demanded stricter engineering standards to protect against earthquakes. Engineers went back to the drawing board in order to figure out whether or not their expensive $15 billion high-speed rail was at risk. This delayed the project. A few months later, in December, THSRC switched the supplier of its train technology from Alstom Siemens, maker of the Eurotrain, to the Japanese makers of the Shinkansen. The reasons THSRC did this are not exactly clear, but appear to be for financial. Japan offered more loans as the company started to run low on cash, and political reasons, deepening relations with a crucial ally in uncertain times. Considering that THSRC's original bid was based on Eurotrain technology, people were pissed. Alstom Siemens protested and everyone went to court. The Taiwan High Court rejected their lawsuit, but the Singapore International Arbitration Center brokered a compensation deal wherein THSRC would pay the Europeans $65 million. Extremely costly. Not to say that these aren't great trains, though. They are THSR 700T train sets supplied by Kawasaki Heavy Industries, Nippon Sharyo, and Hitachi. They are customized 700 series Shinkansen trains like the ones used in JR Central and JR West. Each train is made out of 12 cars, seats a maximum of 989 people, and can go as fast as 300 kilometers an hour. That's 186 miles an hour. Shinkansen technology had never before then been exported overseas. They are very nice trains. 8 years later, in January 2007, the first trial trains began to run, and the network began accepting customers at half-off introductory pricing. But the problems would not end there. During the tender bidding process, the consortiums ran through 5 different ridership assumptions. Initial ridership turned out to be about 50,000 riders a day compared to 100,000 estimated. The government's most conservative estimates turned out to be closest to the actuals. The company, THSRC's, turned out to be the most optimistic. Being off by 50% is a big deal in financial modeling if you are aware. Part of the reason for this lack of adoption was due to a weaker economy after the 1998 Asian financial crisis. Another had to do with a rash of bad publicity from people circulating false rumors about how safe the high-speed rail would actually be. You had public legislators telling their constituents not to risk their lives being the rail's guinea pig. It was all a big kerfuffle. As the bad news of low ridership circulated, THSRC Inc. began to struggle. The company was founded with an amazing amount of debt, some $14 billion worth, 5 times more than shareholder equity. Then, during the construction period in 2003-2006, the company issued another $2 billion of common equity and $1 billion of preferred equity to buyers like China Steel and China Aviation. Preferred shares are like common shares that act like debt in that they pay interest. The interest rates for these preferred shares were very high, some 5% annually, and the buyers bought them with the understanding that THRC would buy them back in full 5 years later. Well, not a complete understanding. 5 years later, those buyers tried to get them to do exactly that, and THSRC invoked a surprise clause in the contract that led to everyone going back into court again. Meanwhile, the company struggled to turn a profit. Some of this was due to low ridership counts, though they were rising over time, and another part was due to purely accounting reasons. The purely accounting reasons have to do with something called depreciation. Depreciation is an accounting concept created to deal with the fact that fixed assets get worn down over time. No actual cash is spent. It's just sort of like if I were to say, well, my MacBook is going to last about 5 years and it's worth about $0 at the end of it, 5 years, but I spent $1,500. Each year is going to technically cost me about $300 of depreciation. It's basically $1,500 divided by 5 years. THSRC estimated that its assets would be worth $0 in 35 years, the end of the concession period, so it depreciated those assets by 1/35 of the total value each year. This depreciation cost hit their income statement hard. It basically was higher than their revenue and meant that the company showed deep losses for their early years. Normally, this isn't like a real problem. Depreciation is just an accounting concept. It doesn't actually represent cash going out the door. A few years later, THSRC would change its accounting policies to correct this. The Asian banks and industry organizations are deeply conservative. Seeing those deep losses, even if it's just on paper, made them nervous and more strict about their interest payments. THSRC found it really hard to get loans to service its debt and stay solvent. The company eventually had to turn to Lehman Brothers, of all people. They helped refinance with a $10 billion 3-year loan at 0.5% interest rates. By 2015, things had gone on for too long. The Taiwan government had to step in. They terminated the build-operate transfer agreement and restructured THRC's debt, retiring 60% of it and raising $1 billion in new capital. It also directed government banks and entities to invest about $500 million into the company. All in all, resulting in about 64% of the operating company shares. The biggest thing, though, was that the Taiwan government extended the railway concession from 35 years to 70, giving the railway company a lot more relief, but at definitely a cost. The Minister of Transportation was forced to resign. It was all good stuff. But the story is not just here to crap on the high-speed rail, by the way. The railway is an engineering marvel and a true technological achievement. It stole market share from airplanes and buses and helped to reduce carbon emissions, conserve energy, and keep the roads clear. High-speed rail has won awards for its service and offers a super nice lunchbox meal, too. But, perhaps in order to make it more politically viable, government ministers oversold its benefits while underselling the financial costs. Only 2 train routes of this high-speed rail type have ever really financially broke even, the short Paris-Lyon and Tokyo-Osaka routes. And mega projects as big and hard as the high-speed rail will regularly experience delays. It was almost inevitable then that the taxpayer would have to foot the bill, $650 for each man, woman, and child on Taiwan Island. A government looking for an easy political win, but balking at the cost of an expensive thing, looked for an easy way out. They thought they had it with this private-public partnership, but they were wrong. Alright. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.